Every spring, millions of people stop at riverbanks, pull out their phones, and photograph something they believe is one of nature's most peaceful scenes. A swan nest. A mother sitting still, a father gliding nearby, everything calm, everything white, everything perfect. What they don't know, what nobody tells them, is that what they're looking at is one of the most psychologically and physically demanding survival operations in the entire animal kingdom. And by the time this video ends, you will never look at a swan nest the same way again. Let's begin with something that the postcard version of swan parenthood never mentions. Before a single egg is laid, before a single cygnet draws its first breath, the female swan, called a pen, has already been through something that would exhaust most living creatures into the ground. Building the nest. Not a modest little cup of twigs in a tree. A mute swan's nest is a structure that can reach 1 meter in height and nearly 2 meters in diameter. It is built almost entirely by the female, using reeds, grass, moss, and whatever organic material is available, and it is rebuilt or reinforced every single year. A pen who has been nesting at the same site for a decade has essentially constructed and reconstructed a small house 10 times. The male, the cob, contributes by bringing materials. He floats up with a reed, drops it, and swims away. The pen arranges everything herself. This is not a metaphor. Behavioral ecologists observing nesting pairs on the River Thames documented males delivering material to the nest site an average of 43 times per day during peak construction, while females spent up to 11 hours a day actively building. If you've ever renovated a home while someone repeatedly handed you materials but never actually helped install anything, you have an approximate idea of the dynamic. But here is the part where the reality of this process starts to become genuinely confrontational. A pen lays between 4 and 8 eggs, typically one every other day over the course of about 2 weeks. Each egg weighs roughly 340 grams. Imagine holding a medium-sized apple. Now imagine producing that from your own body every 48 hours while also sitting on the nest for up to 23 hours a day, maintaining an incubation temperature of precisely 37.5 degrees Celsius, and rotating each egg individually with your beak multiple times per day to ensure even heat distribution. For 35 to 41 days. Without a break longer than an hour or 2. The physiological cost of incubation in swans is documented and measurable. A study published in Functional Ecology tracked body mass in mute swan females across the full incubation period, and found that pens lost an average of 17% of their total body weight before the first egg hatched. Not across the whole breeding season. During incubation alone. The female swan sitting so serenely on her nest that you photographed this morning is essentially running a slow-motion endurance event inside her own body. And now I want to ask you something, because I think it matters for how you engage with what comes next. When you watch an animal doing something that looks passive, sitting, waiting, being still, do you automatically assume it's easy? Because this is one of the most persistent errors in how humans read animal behavior. Stillness is not rest. For a nesting swan, stillness is work. Everything in her biology is active, expensive, and irreversible. Keep that thought, because it becomes critical when we get to the hatching. The eggs do not hatch together. This is a fact that surprises almost everyone. Despite being laid over a period of 2 weeks, swan eggs are incubated from the first egg laid, which means hatching is staggered. The oldest egg hatches first, and then the rest follow over the course of a day or 2. By the time the last cygnet cracks its way out of the shell, the firstborn sibling is already mobile, already demanding food, already exercising the instincts that will either save or end its life in the coming weeks. The hatching process itself, called pipping, takes between 24 and 48 hours per egg. The cygnet uses a specialized temporary structure called an egg tooth, a small hard protrusion on the tip of its beak, to crack the shell from the inside. This is exhausting work. Newborn cygnets have been observed resting inside the partially cracked egg for hours, gathering energy between attempts. The pen does not crack the egg for them. She does not help. She stays still, she keeps the temperature steady, and she waits. Because a cygnet that cannot break out of its own egg on its own is a cygnet that will not survive what comes next. That is not sentiment. That is functional biology. And it is the first of many brutal filters that swan parenting is built around. Here is something wildlife documentaries tend to skip over, and it is important. Cygnet mortality in the first year of life is extraordinarily high. Across multiple long-term population studies in the UK and Northern Europe, including data from the British Trust for Ornithology's ongoing swan monitoring program, first-year survival rates for mute swan cygnets range from approximately 30% to 50% depending on habitat, year, and population pressure. That means in any given brood of 6 cygnets, statistically, 3 will not survive to see their first winter. This is not a tragedy in the way we usually mean the word. It is the mechanism. Swan parents are not raising cygnets to the finish line. They are creating the conditions for the strongest individuals to reach the finish line themselves. Every decision the parents make, where to nest, when to move the brood, how aggressively to defend the territory, how long to tolerate weak or slow cygnets before the family moves on, is a decision shaped by 4 million years of evolutionary pressure. The parents are not being cruel. They are being extraordinarily, precisely, ruthlessly good at their job. Let's talk about what the first days after hatching actually look like, because this is where the psychological reality of swan parenthood becomes impossible to romanticize. Within 24 hours of the last egg hatching, the entire family enters open water. The cygnets, grey, fluffy, approximately the size of a large fist, follow their parents onto a river or lake they have never seen before, navigate currents and depth they have never experienced, and immediately begin competing with their siblings for warmth and feeding position. Smaller cygnets are physically pushed aside by larger ones. They ride on their mother's back not merely for the charm of it, but because immersion in cold water is lethal for a cygnet whose thermoregulation system is not yet fully operational. Being on the back is not comfort. It is survival. The cob, the father, patrols a perimeter that can extend hundreds of meters in all directions, and he does this continuously, with a kind of sustained vigilance that humans would find psychologically intolerable within days. Foxes, mink, large pike, herons, and even large gulls will take cygnets if given the opportunity. In a documented case from the Somerset Levels in 2018, a cob was observed repelling the same heron from his brood's feeding area 11 times in a single afternoon. 11 encounters in one afternoon, each requiring full threat display, physical positioning, and sustained alertness. When you see a male swan sitting quietly on the water, there is a very real chance that an hour ago he was doing something that would exhaust a trained athlete. Now I want to ask you something that I think touches on something deeper than just swan behavior. Think about a parent you know, human or animal, who has made enormous sacrifices that were invisible to almost everyone around them. What made those sacrifices invisible? Why do we so consistently fail to see effort that doesn't look like effort? Leave your answer below, because I think this is one of those questions where the responses genuinely tell us something about how we see the world. Because this is the core tension in the story of swan parenting. Everything the pen and cob do to keep their cygnets alive is either invisible, misread, or romanticized into something it isn't. The stillness is not peace. The aggression is not mindless anger. The moment when a cob stops defending a cygnet that has fallen behind, a behavior called brood reduction acceptance, documented in numerous waterfowl species, is not abandonment. It is the hardest possible version of a pragmatic calculation. Resources directed towards survivors increase the overall probability of genetic continuation. Darwin didn't say survival of the fittest because it sounded poetic. He said it because he was watching exactly what we are describing right now. By late summer, the cygnets that have survived are entering the most socially complex period of their young lives. The family group begins to fracture. The juvenile swans, now larger, grey-brown rather than white, starting to develop adult feathers, begin to be driven away by the cob. This is not a gradual loosening. This is active displacement. The father who spent an entire summer repelling every threat that came within 200 meters of his offspring will, by October, be chasing those same offspring away from his territory. Researchers have different interpretations of why this happens. The most widely supported explanation involves resource allocation. The territory needs to be cleared for the next breeding season, and adult swans simply cannot afford to share their range with their own grown offspring. But there is also evidence suggesting a developmental function. Juvenile swans that are forced out of parental territory earlier tend to explore more widely, establish better foraging knowledge, and ultimately form pair bonds sooner than those allowed to linger. Being pushed out is, in a very real sense, a graduation. The cygnets that survive this first year will spend the next 2 to 3 years in juvenile flocks, learning to be swans. Learning the social hierarchies, the territorial rules, the migration routes, the feeding strategies, and ultimately the partner selection behaviors that are among the most sophisticated in the avian world. They will not breed until they are at least 3 years old, often 4 or 5. All of that time is preparation. All of that time traces back to one nest, one 35-day incubation, one mother losing 17% of her body weight in silence. So the next time you stop at that riverbank and take a photograph of a swan family, the parents gliding, the grey fluff balls tumbling after them, I want you to hold this thought. You are looking at the end product of one of the most ruthless, most tender, most intelligent survival systems that evolution has ever produced. You are looking at winners. Every single cygnet still alive in that frame has already survived things that most people, watching from a safe distance, cannot begin to imagine. The brutal reality of raising cygnets is that it looks beautiful from the outside. And the swans, for all their apparent serenity, have never once asked for our admiration. They're far too busy doing the actual work. If this changed how you see swan parenting, or parenting in any form, tell me in the comments. What was the detail that hit you hardest? And if you want to follow these cygnets through their first winter and see what the survival statistics actually look like in practice, the next video picks up exactly where this one ends. I'll see you there.